Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's discussion, conversation, Dark Matter, Independent Filmmaking in the 21st Century. My name's Sandra Hebron, and I have the pleasure of moderating this conversation, though I'm not sure that it's going to need a huge amount of moderating. And it's a pleasure for me to do this. I've worked in film exhibition for quite some decades, actually, and over the years I've been very pleased to have the opportunity to show films by everyone on this panel. But what we're really here to talk about today is how independent films get made, or quite often don't get made. And I think we're also going to be thinking about what kind of cultural economy would be better to meet the needs of both filmmakers and audiences. And to do that, as you can see, we are joined by three filmmakers who have really extensive and varied experience that they're going to share with us today. And arguably, they need very little in the way of introduction, but as a courtesy, I will be introducing each of them. So on my far left is Leigh. Mike writes and directs films and plays, and I think is one of our most significant cultural voices. He started out working in theatre. He made his first feature film, Bleak Moments, in 1971, and then followed that by making 9 television plays, some of which you will surely have seen, Nuts in May, Abigail's Party, and Grown Ups amongst them. He's subsequently made, I think, 12 feature films, including High Hopes, Naked, which some of you might have seen here the other day, the Palme d'Or winner, Secrets and Lies, Topsy Turvy, Mr. Tuck and Peterloo, and a well-deserved retrospective of his work will take place here in November. Next to Mike is Michael Winterbottom, the author of the book Dark Matters, which was the prompt for today's conversation. Michael is one of British cinema's most versatile and productive filmmakers. He started his filmmaking life with a documentary about Ingmar Bergman, and since then his feature films have included Wonderland, Jude, 24-Hour Party People, A Cock and Bull Story, and Greed, as well as the Berlinale Award-winning In This World and The Road to Guantanamo, alongside documentaries and TV series. And then finally, immediately next to me is Asif Kapadia. Asif has been making films since the late 1990s, and Asif's debut feature film, The Warrior, was really seen as heralding the arrival of a very original new voice in British cinema. His other fiction films have included Far North and Ali and Nino, but more recently it's his documentary work on films such as Senna, the Oscar-winning Amy, and Diego Maradona that have really brought him international recognition. Asif has also directed for television, including episodes of the Netflix series Mindhunter, and he's recently made a VR project called Leica, which I think also debuted here quite recently. So a real kind of spread of experience. But to get started, Michael, can we just talk a little bit about the sort of impetus to write the book, why you wanted to write it now, and what the sort of dark matter of the title refers to?
I'd sort of been making films quite a long time, sort of 25 years roughly. And I just kind of felt like that the space we were working in was getting more complicated and narrower. So I thought I'd take a break and think about the way we were working. Me as a director, I have a little company called Revolution Films, how they were working. But also, and I thought that a good way of thinking about the way we work was to talk to other people. So I came up with a list of about sort of 20 directors whose work I really admired and had a lot of success. 2 of them are here today, and just really sort of use the book as an excuse to sort of talk to them and hear their kind of process working, not about the films themselves, but about how to get films made, that kind of process of trying to get stuff made. And it kind of struck me, quite early on from the list that, of the people that I really thought were great filmmakers, probably about 3/4 of them had done fewer than a handful of sort of British films, British independent films. And obviously had lots of great careers and gone off and done stuff in America, or done stuff in theatre, or done stuff in TV, or whatever. But actually a really small number of films here. And it seemed to me so it's interesting for me to talk to individually about the individual struggles of getting stuff made and how people work and what helps you make films. But they seem to be standing back a bit as well, that pattern is quite strange. It's like, so, and that there must be something about the culture, if you like, the structure, that means that so many people who start off with a sort of very successful film end up making only 2 or 3 more across what could be quite a long period of time.
Mm-hmm. And I'm really struck that when I introduced each of you, I sort of present a narrative about you that makes it sound like you've all just been sort of happily going along, making films, you've made amazing work, it's all been recognised.
It's true in Mike's case.
But I think even in Mike's case, there is a kind of hidden kind of story, if you like, that we don't see about the processes that are involved in that. And I wonder if, just to sort of set the scene, I'm aware that in the audience there are certainly people who are sort of currently active in the film industry, but there might be some who are not. If you come up with an amazing idea for a project, where do you go to? What are your options in the current UK landscape?
Well, it's a tough question, to be honest. The key word in the question was asked is the current landscape. It's very hard for me to talk about this, knowing that there's a risk of my saying things which will sound like general principles that would apply, And I say that because, as many people will know, on the whole, not on the whole, in fact, because of the way I make films, which is to say there's no script and the film is developed for the most part we discover what the film is on the journey of making it, in the way that people write novels and paint pictures and make music and write poetry, etc. All the films that I've made have begun by saying to potential backers, can't tell you anything about it, can't tell you who's in it, give us the money and let us make the film. There are 3 exceptions in my 20-odd films where that wasn't quite the case. And those are the 3 historical films that I've made. Topsy-Turvy, which was about the Victorian theatre, Mr. Turner, which was about the painter, and Peterloo, which was about the Peterloo massacre, where we could say it's going to be, there isn't a script, but this is what it's about, and we're going to investigate and bring to life these events. The standard thing has been to say to potential backers what I've just said. And over the long period that I've been doing this, one of 2 things has happened. Either they say, great, here's the money, go off and make a film, we won't interfere, or they tell us to fuck off. And it won't surprise anybody to know that the latter scenario has happened more times than the former. Now, I make no bones about it. I have been very, very lucky in having got away with making films on that premise at all, actually. And I really, and this is why I say I'm cautious about talking about my experience, lest it should be taken as a kind of generalization, because I was very, very lucky to be, if you like, discovered in some way by Tony Garnett, who got me into the BBC. And the great thing about the BBC, and we're talking filmmaking in the Play for Today period, was that unlike television now, and we talked about this, there was a head of plays, so-called, a number of producers, no script editors, no other people involved. Each producer had a certain number of films, and he or she could do just what he or she wanted with them. And indeed, I did talk to some producers when I was trying to hustle a gig, who would say, well, I really like what you do, but I can't just give away a film and not know what it is, because I've got all these other writers who've got scripts and I know what they are. But some of them said, okay, let's go for it, and then we made the films. I had, as you said, made a feature film, Bleak Moments, which was backed. The reason that could happen is it was backed with great imagination by Albert Finney, also backed Stephen Frears' first film, and a film which was Gumshoe, and a film by Tony Scott called Loving Memory. And Albert simply had made a lot of money from Tom Jones, because he'd gone for a percentage rather than a fee, and he decided to, in his mid-30s, to put it into young filmmakers. But it was to be 18 years before I could make the next feature. And that only became possible when Channel 4 started with the remit to put television money into movies. You couldn't get an independent, indigenous, serious British film made until that time. You really couldn't. I mean, there were very, very few and far between, because apart from anything else, and I don't want to make a big thing about this, but this is very important that this underpins everything we talk about here, is we have to remember the ineluctable and pernicious influence of Hollywood, not only on what films get made, but how films get distributed, on what goes into the cinemas, and all of that, which we know, of course, dates back to the First World War, when Hollywood saw fit to really move out into in an imperial way into the world. And, you know, the problem, there are two problems. One is that the actual industrial and exhibition and the whole processes, but also there is the mindset, isn't there, of the Hollywood, you know, the criteria as to what a film is. And for a long time it was possible to make films with the kind of, relatively speaking, with the kind of freedom I've just been talking about, for some people, if you were lucky. But the Hollywood mindset, in other words, the notion, the principle invented, if you like, metaphorically speaking, by Louis B. Mayer, which is, you know, that the producer interferes with everything and really controls, you know, the director is a hired hand to carry out the producer's preconceptions about what the audience wanted. That disease is, not only is it still prevalent, but it's actually more prevalent than it was previously because of the nature of streaming and all the rest of it, and it's become more and more difficult. And I'll just say one other thing. I'm sorry I had to go on so long, but you asked me.
I think Asif should. I was just going to get Asif in.
But the other thing is, public funding is also afflicted by a disease, not because of preconceptions about box office, but about preconceptions of things like diversity. That's now creeping into the bloodstream and is perverting decisions that are made, so that young filmmakers, and I'm in touch with a lot of them, have a lot of trouble. For example, to name but a few, with the BFI backers, who are not straightforward, who do not give freedom and space, but in fact are endlessly and increasingly and appallingly prescriptive for those reasons, and that's a great danger too, and another problem that young filmmakers are consistently facing.
Thank you. Let's.
It just struck me when you were talking about the sort of type of filming and the sort of your approach, which is to not, you know, to have the freedom by not telling people, that echoes something that you were talking about. And a lot of the directors talk about like the frustrations of development, but you were saying that you found you have more freedom in documentary filmmaking than fiction.
Yeah, there's a lot in what Mike's just said and what you're saying, Sandra, because what I wanted to say was actually, because I've read the book, and the book's really interesting because Michael has basically written a book in the way I'm saying this from afar, that you would make a film. You basically had like a week where you had all these directors at home doing nothing. And also, because it was in the middle of lockdown, April 2020, it seems, around then, right, that everyone's kind of introspective and thinking about, what does it all mean? Why the hell are we doing this? Why are we spending so much of our time away? And are we all going to die? And we're not, So you've got everyone at a really interesting moment where I think a lot of the directors are very open. I don't think you'd get the same book if you spoke to them now. You wouldn't get half of them probably because they'd be saying they'd be busy. So what's really interesting, Sandra, for me was that no matter who they are, however successful, there's all of these themes running through all of the directors and all of the kind of insecurities and interesting relationships with producers and money and the projects that they wanted to make, and kind of lack of trust in who they are and what they do. Even if you've had a big hit, the next one you start from scratch. Yeah. And it's like, but show us what it's going to be, because we don't know if you can do it. And all of that, I think, is really interesting in the book, and I think that's what works. I really felt I was kind of moved by lots of the interviews, and then you see kind of similarities of your own journey. And I suppose coming to me, for me, there was a point where I wanted to make a certain type of cinema, but let me go on a sideways thing. There's a bunch of directors that are interviewed who seem to come out of the TV world, Play for Today and all of this kind of single drama, so they made a lot of work and they were used to working quickly, and then now we have the streamers world, and then we have the people in between, who I am one of, who came out when there was this kind of the Film Council or the BFI and things like that, and I would say there was an element of, if you got along with them, you were going to get money. If you didn't get along with them, you were not going to get money. So then you had to find another way. And one of the most obvious ways would be to go to the US. Or you have to do co-productions, and you can spend years just trying to put together pieces of money to make a film. And then they became a point for me where it's like, well, if I keep doing that, I'll never make anything. And I had a chance to do Senna as something different. And I love film, and I love cinema, and I love world cinema, but I also like sport and football, and racing cars in this case. And Amy was my London film, which I could do partly in a way like you, Mike, where it was about Amy Winehouse. That was it. There was no pitch, no treatment, no document, no sizzle, no trailer. It was like, we'd made Senna, people had liked that, and they said, do you want to make Amy? I was like, well, if I can get the music and the publishing, then yes, give me 2 years, leave me alone. And I've not ever had that freedom before or after. My first feature I had a lot of freedom, The Warrior, I have to say. I remember being on set and thinking, this is really hard. We're up in the Himalayas, and the script supervisor, Pat Rambo, was very experienced. She did The Killing Fields. She did lots of really tough films. She said, you don't know how lucky you are. You're never going to have this sort of freedom ever again in your life. Yeah. And she knew, and she was right. And I never have had the freedom where nobody came to visit on the set. There were no kind of like notes and things. It was just like, go off and make your film.
It does help being in the Himalayas.
It's one of the reasons I was in the Himalayas was nobody, because people came on a tech scout and got so ill, they said, we're never coming back. I'm like, great. The Bond said, I'm never going to come and visit you again because he got so ill, so that helped. But all of these things are kind of linked into the reasons why we do what we do.
And there's lots coming out of everything that you're saying that I'd like to pick up on. But I think, you mentioned the issues around the development process. And Michael, I think that's something that comes through really clearly in the book. And I know you've also kind of written separately about that. I'm wondering, how you managed to sort of navigate a way through that, and how, what the possibilities are, if you like, of retaining a greater degree of creative freedom. I don't know if that's something that you've had quite a lot of practice in having to navigate a way through.
Yeah, I think I think the easiest way, in a way, is the way that Mike describes. So we've done things which have been like sort of, there is no script. That's an easy way of trying to keep some sort of space. I don't think it's about control. I think it's about having the space to, as you're making a film, for it to develop and you understand what the film is as it goes along. Like you were saying, it would be normal as a writer or almost any other form that as you make the work is how you discover what you're trying to make. But in film, especially in situations where it's like, sort of quite a bureaucratic system of and you need to get the script, then you get told, given all the notes on the script, then you have to go in, cast it, and then you go in, find the locations, then you go in, shoot. That it's very sort of broken up, and you sort of almost have to define what the film is.
You need
before
to know
start.
everything beforehand.
Yeah.
And that is incredibly frustrating, I think, as a director. You know, and there's some writers in the audience. I'm sure writers love that process, but as a director, get to that. But as a director, that's frustrating because what you want it to sort of develop organically. You have a kind of rough idea, and it's really when you go to places or you choose the actors to be in it, or you're working with your crew. It's then you start to sort of work out how you want to make it and what it is you're trying to make.
It's more organic.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? Everything changes every day. Things can happen and change. And suddenly, like, you have an idea that you think, this is better than that thing that I've been thinking about for 2 years. But sometimes you feel like I can't go with it. Why? Because we've already set this up, and therefore I have to.
And
I think one way to try and help you have that space is to have your own company. It's a sort of formal structure that gives you a little bit of protection. A group of people you work with as a sort of, the team. It doesn't need to be in a formal structure like a company. But I think it is quite handy. I think talking to different directors, there was definitely a correlation between the directors who've done quite a lot of films and the ones who have that kind of stable company structure or stable relationship like you have,
Yeah.
for example.
Yes, I think that's true, but that sort of only solves the problem to a limited
Sure,
degree.
of course.
Because, what we're actually talking about, and we've already referred to it quite a lot, is that it's where the money comes from and what control they have. And indeed you can have your own company, but it doesn't fund
Sure.
whatever else. It doesn't fund the film.
Sure, and I think the thing is in Britain, there's about 400 million quid's worth of taxpayers' money to support film industry here, but almost all of that goes to international, multinational corporations, multi-billion pound corporations like Warner's or Sony.
Disney.
Only a small amount, like about 40 million, is handed into independent filmmaking. So I kind of think it would be nice if those people handing the relatively small percentage of money to make independent filming are trying to enable filmmakers to be independent. Instead of which I think it often feels like they want to be commissioning editors and they're like sort of picking the film, and then they sort of and sort of telling you what they think the film should be like, as opposed to that relatively small pocket of money should ideally be sustaining people. So people like Asif have made 10 or 12, sort of British independent films, and Lynn Ramsey or Andrew Arnold or whoever, the same. People who had some, to be supported to make what they find interesting to make.
Something that you say in your book, which seems to be this kind of constant thing of trying to find a first-time filmmaker, but not necessarily a second or a third.
Yeah.
And when I've been in France, I remember there were funds which were helping you make your second film or your third film. And when you go to other countries, or I've just been on a jury in Zurich where they give awards money to people who have made either their first, second or third film.
Yeah.
And I think maybe there's just a bit too much obsession, which is great to make your first film, but I know a lot of friends who've made first films, but they never made a second one.
Yeah.
I
There's
think
a
that's,
massive drop-off.
you've got to have, I think it's got to be about the long term. It's got to be about making bad films sometimes to learn the experience of making films in order to be able to make more and better.
But also, it should be something that you can sustain. So, it's incredibly impressive, the work that Mike's done and Ken Loach as well. Like, you'd be able to sustain this working on films they want to make, over a long period of time. But I think if you, with the exception of them, you sort of look at it, it's almost a bit as though sort of the mindset is that doing low-budget films in Britain is a stepping stone. It's a stepping stone to something else. So you can, once you've done a couple, well then get on and do something else. We're not going to be, it's like, if you imagine like the National Theatre was just funded for a couple of years, then it's like, well, you go off and become a West End theatre. Or athletes were just funded for their first competition, and then it's like, well, you've done your first competition, now you can fund yourself. That would be no way to sustain those people to achieve what they want to achieve.
But I think that I'm not sure how to ask this as a question, so I'll do it badly. But again, it's a preoccupation that I have, which is that floating in the ether of the UK film industry and film culture are lots of assumptions about what filmmakers should do. Those of us who are not filmmakers have a lot of opinions, apparently, about what filmmakers should do. So we don't like it if you make too many films, and we also don't like it if you don't make enough. And we don't like it if your films look rather like each other, but we also don't like it if your films all look very different from each other. There's somehow, it seems to be that whatever you're doing...
Like that, it sounds like you don't like anything.
But I'm being kind of devil's advocate
I know.
because I've seen things written about so many filmmakers where these kind of assumptions come into play. And so aside from the purely commercial economic considerations, if there ever are such things, I'm interested in, for each of you, if you feel that there are if there have been times when assumptions about what you should be making or shouldn't be making have come into play. I'm interested, Mike, in when people tell you to fuck off, is it because they're not the right people to fund your film, or is it because there's something about that particular project that they don't think is...
Oh yes, it is that particular project, which is always a project about which they know nothing. That's the definition of it. And they don't want to put money into something that they don't know what they're going to get, and over which they have no control.
Yeah.
Or at least they don't know what it is. And the frustration for me, of course, is that this has happened when I've already made loads of such films, including ones that won the Palme d'Or and the Golden Lion at Venice, and still they say, well, we don't know what, you know, so that's all it is. I mean, I could talk a bit, but I won't, especially about reservations about making a film about the Peterloo massacre, only because they political suddenly presented itself, and the ridiculous assumption that I've never made a political film, whereas in fact all my films are political, without question. But that's kind of more obvious. But you know, in the end, what it comes down to, and really this relates to what you just said, there's a limited pot, and if there's a limited pot, and a lot of and a great deal of the sense of responsibility to how to spend that pot, and you want to spread the pot and all the rest of it, then by definition and inevitably, more and more reasons to be cautious about projects creep in, and it inhibits the process. I mean, that's just a fact of life. And therefore, the issue is, what Andy referred to it, Michael, it is about how much money there is, and whether it's, you know, I mean, here's the thing, you mentioned Warner Brothers, right? Now, a whole bunch of us in the industry were, a couple of years ago, were regularly invited to private screenings at Warner Brothers of the various films that they'd restored, mostly of Kubrick's films, which was very nice. And every single time, the guys at Warner Brothers, the big white chiefs, would be ecstatic for me to be there, and would extol my work. And all, of course, we filmmakers, you know, you sit there thinking, yeah, and where's the check? Approach Warner Brothers, and they just absolutely no way, because that's not the same thing as appreciating and celebrating what you do. Funding it is a whole different ball game. I don't know if that resonates with your experience.
Yeah, but I think there's it definitely being turned down by Warner Brothers, definitely, I'm sure. But I think more specifically, and it seems like a kind of small thing, but it's like, you know, as I say, like the sort of the 30 or 40 million spent on independent film is administered by 3 organisations, really, BFI, Film 4, BBC Films, and I think we've had probably 7 films released abroad, theatrically as films abroad, that have been straight for TV here, because we had TV funding. So they're funded by TV funding here. And in the wisdom, the TV company's like, you can't show it in the cinema at all if we fund it. It's only useful to us if it's a premiere on TV, even though the streamers now show that isn't the case. But the reason we took the TV money here is because we've had like individual films where they said, well, look, you get 1.5 million for our TV department, or we'll give you 400,000 quid for it as a license fee for film. That's a complete arbitrary thing, that somehow a film shown on TV is only worth a fraction of what a TV programme shown on TV is. And as I say, like the streaming platforms show now that distinction is completely fake distinctions. They spend like 80 million or whatever on a thing that goes straight out onto the streamer. So that would be, given that these are the places charged with supporting independent film, they could make a massive difference to the economics of sustaining your company, of sustaining your filmmaking, if they gave you the right amount. Because half the people in the book that I talked to, great directors like Peter Strickland, Joanne Haag, or Lynn, or my first film was Asif, or no, your first film was quite expensive actually, but Asif's first film, we're low budget films, like under a couple of million quid. And so if you got that money, if when Film 4 showed it, they gave you the money they would do for sort of a couple of hours of TV drama, you'd be in the black straight away. You made the money back already. So everything you sold abroad would be money, that would be profit, would support your company, support you, but also just give that feeling for everyone's point of view, oh, that film's done really well, it's made money. You know, instead of which, by putting in only a fraction of the money, it means people spend years trying to get together another 400,000 from here, another 400,000 from there. And so you waste years trying to accumulate these tiny pots of money. And then inevitably, because that's all equity, it looks like your film hasn't made its money back because it's got to make millions just to break even. So that would be a really simple change that would transform the kind of possibilities of filmmakers, once they've made a film or two, to be able to sustain that and keep working in a low-budget area and keep making money.
Have either of you ever been asked, like, by the funding bodies to talk to them about how potentially they could reorganise the funding of films here?
No.
Because are there any filmmakers, like as in directors, ever involved in that process? Are you aware of anyone?
No, but it's fascinating that you should say that, because we live in I would say that we live in a culture now where, certainly from the exhibition side of things, we're talking all the time about how we do better, how we work ethically, who we collaborate with, how we ask people what they need. But it doesn't, I don't know, but it might just be my ignorance. I'm not aware of that having filtered through much into the financing, funding side of things.
Can I just say, one of the things that we regularly experience with pitching projects to potential backers is, which I'm prompted to say by what you just said, Michael, is the response, you get the response from my exec producer saying, they're interested. It's a possibility. But they want to look at the figures. And what that means is they will look at the returns on all my previous films going all the way back. The international sales. Now, I've only made one film, which was a real runaway international commercial success, and that was Secrets and Lies. Not just because it got the Palme d'Or and then a whole bunch of Academy nominations, but because of its subject matter, because it remains illegal in many countries, including 50 of the 52 United States, to trace your birth mother, etc. But the others have done either okay or quite well or badly. Looked at in the internet. That's nothing to do with awards, that's nothing to do with criticism, that's nothing to do with minority audience popularity or whatever. It's to do with money. Now, that informs decision making. Now, you must have experienced that. And that, I think, that has to be understood, that in the end, it's like, for all the will in the world, that's when you suddenly think, oh God, this is where we're going to be found out. This is where they're going to find out we're lying. We're not telling the truth.
Well, and
resonate with you.
That idea of the sort of comp title, which of course for you, Mike, I guess, because often, of course, what funders will do is they'll look at comp titles by other filmmakers, like they'll hazard a guess at what films were closest to the film that you're planning to make. With you, that's difficult because you make such singular films. But I suspect for Michael, they're probably not looking only at your figures, but they're also looking at what they would see as films that have been released that deal with either a similar subject matter or that are in a similar genre.
Yeah, I think there's like there's lots of different strands which we perhaps merging together. So I think like getting commercial money from a commercial organisation is one thing. They are going to look at the numbers. So so if you do a film with Sony, they're going to look at the numbers and see how it works. I think there's a separate thing about what with the money that's being used to support independent filmmaking, what should be done about that, because that it should be they should be looking for different outcomes. They shouldn't be looking for
commercial.
And I think one thing that happens, which you mentioned about your first film being your freest one. I think quite a few people I talked to them. was saying how like the first film at a low budget level was very free, and I think probably a lot of people, if you could carry on making those films, would carry on in that area. So that by transforming the finance, the £2 million film will be making money. You're probably happy to work in that area with a lot of freedom. You choose who you want. But instead of that, there's a sort of mindset that. And partly because it's structured so those films almost automatically lose money, but there's a sort of mindset that, therefore, that hasn't really quite worked, or you've done that one, but the next one should be a bit bigger. And then as you try and go to 3 million, 4 million, 5 million, it's like, well, then you need, what actors do you need? What is the story like? Well, and you then find yourself trying to adjust and compromise your project into a way that might make it work at 3 million quid, or 5 million quid, or 7 million quid. And obviously some people want to do that, and some people go straight from their first low-budget film to a Marvel Studios film. That's what you want, but you should be able to carry on work. I think in the area where you started and had your success, you should be able to stay in that area, I think.
I think a simple thing could be, whereas everything is about well done, thank you. But whereas everything is about the first film, I think if it just became first, second, third film, like the funding where they're looking for filmmakers, if it was helping people make the second one and the third one, I don't see the massive changes that would need to happen. But there are people like yourself who may have made something for nothing where you paid for it yourself, and it may well have got sold somewhere, but that shouldn't mean you shouldn't get the chance to then apply for your second, or even if you've made two like that. And a lot of the directors that I know lie about having not made a first film for the reason to get in the mix for certain awards. You have to lie because the process is like, don't be honest, lie to us, and then we might ignore the fact we know you made that film, but we won't tell anyone. It happens all the time, so it should simply be first, second, third, I think. By the time you get to your fourth, maybe you're kind of on the way to some form of career.
Yeah, but I think obviously streamers could put money into independent films. They do, currently they do. They tend to be based in America, those films, because streamers are based in America. So that inevitably, quite a lot of independent American films have been made. How many independent British films have you been financed from the start by streamers? I don't think hardly any. Until recently, you had to go to America to talk to Netflix about making a film in the UK anyway, and they tended to do quite commercial films here. But of course, potentially that's the case. But I kind of think, like, given that at the moment the money's been independent, money to support independence is being administered by Film 4 and BBC and BFI, it's good to look to how they're using that money to start with, rather than demanding that an American-based corporation is the solution to British independent filmmaking.
Just a little bit of experience. When we decided to make a film about the Peterloo massacre, we knew that would need a much bigger budget than I'd ever had. And we said from the outset, this probably isn't going to happen. And my producers went to Cannes, and on day one, they met Ted Hope of Amazon. Now, Amazon Studios had just started, and they said to Ted Hope, Mike Leigh wants to make a film about Peterloo massacre, and he said, great, we're on. And they came in, they backed it almost entirely, a bit of Channel 4 and a couple of others, but mostly they did. They never interfered with it, not for a split second. They supported it all the way, and that was fantastic. More recently, with another project, they've grown up, and they don't want to know, basically, or at least they're very different. Netflix, just as a matter of interest, have just turned me down 10 days ago. Purely that, there's no way. They said we can't contemplate a film where we don't know what it is and there is no casting. So that's just, what was we know that Netflix could, without blinking, fork out any amount of bread for anybody here to make anything, and it wouldn't.
But if I could just add one thing to your point about Amazon, for me that experience also speaks to the importance of certain key individuals, because when you went to Amazon, Ted Hope was running the film department, and Scott Founders, who came from quite a kind of international world cinema critical background, they were heading up that department.
Yes.
Ted is no longer there.
And Scott is.
Yeah, but still, I think someone like Ted was able to push forward a certain agenda in that department, but I think it's not coincidental.
My experience is kind of what Michael said, which is that it seems like if you make a series, you're going to get more money, more budget than if you make it as a feature. And there's still a gamble of making features, which is you may get to that first stage of getting it made, and then the real fight starts of getting it seen. And then the battle next time round would be much more difficult if you did get something made and it wasn't seen. So you're going to find it really hard to make the next one and get it made, because that may never get seen because you never get it made. So that is the thing that you're challenged against, which is like making films is one thing, getting them out there in order to make the next one is another fight altogether. And right now, my experience is if you do a series which has no ending, you're more likely to get it funded than to make a film which has an ending.
I think on that, there's just one really quick point, is that in a sense, if you got your project, which is, this is the film I want to make, and someone comes in and says, here's the money, wherever that money's coming from, it's like, great, to make your film. I think, but obviously in general, TV it generally doesn't work like that. In general, there are other things about the culture of TV, which is a very different thing from a director's point of view. So it's not like it's just about working in TV in general versus film in general. So if you're making your film as your film, and it's going on a streamer, like you still made your film. But I think in general, there's a different set of attitudes and cultures in television, which means that your role as a director is just a very different role. It's very hard to have the same sort of freedom. I think, you're right. The number of directors that are female is bizarrely low. And I would say in other areas, like sort of we talked about producing or writing and certainly in sort of commissioning, the women's representation is much higher. I don't know why that is so. In the book, there's like 3 out of 15. I would say that's probably pretty much typical for what the industry is in general, and that obviously is wrong. But I don't. So I'm not sure. But what the reasons for that are, I'm not sure.
Well, it's bad news and it's lamentable, but it's growing, and in due course, there will be the number of women directors that there ought to be.
Can I just add to you? It's a really good question. It's something I did want to talk about at some point, which is that when I was at university, of all of the kind of people at university and at film school, the women were like at the top of every class, right? Of the degree course, my postgraduate, most of the women that I went to film school with who were directors are not making films right now. If they've had kids, they can't get back into the business. My wife is one of them. She went to the National. She can't we've had kids. She's now struggling still to make her first film. I mean, there is a thing. So many of the people who make the decisions are women, but I still find it really hard for everyone that I talk to when you're a woman to get a film made. And particularly if you're older and have had kids, it's really hard. So there's just this incredible loss of talent. People who were production designers, writers, everything, that all of the spectrum, cinematography department, that came up with me at the same time and maybe worked on my short films or worked on my first feature or second feature. Most of them are not in the industry now. I don't know why I think about it, but all I know is they're not making films, and they would say the same thing, is that the industry appears to be looking for mostly young men telling stories and not older women having stories to tell. I don't know if it's different in streamers and TV, maybe it is, but that's my small sample of everyone that I know. That is the way it is right now. I was on the BAFTA committee last year when they tried to change the rules for how the BAFTAs decide, and there was very much a decision made to kind of have half men, half women directors being on the long list and across many categories. I do think the only way it's going to change if there is some sort of active policy put in place to give people a chance.
It's also worth saying that a lot of the people in the power of funding have, like over the last, this book looking at the last 20 years, have been women. Whether it's Tessa Ross, Tanya Sagacharian, Christine Langan, Rose Garner. So a lot of people actually controlling the investment of money into independent films have been women.
And I think that if you look at the proportion of filmmakers whose work have been funded by those filmmakers, it's more varied than on the panel. And whilst we didn't put the panel together, I know that the festival did go out to some of the women who contributed to the book and did, women were invited. But I think in a sense it also speaks to Asif's previous point about, funders taking advice on what's needed. And some smaller kind of initiatives are happening. So I think that Film London have a funding initiative for people who exactly are in the position that Asif's described who've maybe kind of stopped work to have a family and are coming back into, and then organisations like Women in Film and Television are also kind of advocating and active. But it's small changes when what we need is much larger structural change. And I think all of us who have any involvement in the industry have to just keep on, kind of banging on the door about that.
I think you're right. There's definitely a more dynamic film culture and dynamic sort of funding culture in America. I mean, I don't know whether it's like built in people's character here and there. I mean, one aspect of that is that the market is bigger. So you're more likely within America to be able to sort of get your money back. But also, I think one of the frustrations of being a British filmmaker and being based in Britain is that you do a small film about, say, a family in Bradford or whatever, that's seen as a very small story and very British. If you were doing it in Baltimore, you could go all around the world. It's seen as sort of universal. And it's just the nature of the way American culture sort of is communicated around the world, that people all around the world will take a sort of American film as being sort of transparent, as sort of one of their own, whereas a British film becomes peculiarly British. And I think that that obviously therefore means people can take bigger chances because there's sort of more upside. In America as well, obviously, the film industry makes a huge amount of money. So you have very rich stars who make huge amounts of money and could therefore work for nothing for a few weeks. You have, so you have a whole range of factors that are genuine kind of differences. I'm not sure you could replicate that in Britain, unfortunately.
I think it's a business thing. If you're in the US and you make a film, the fact that you're making a film will give you a chance to make another film, because it's just like a 9-to-5 job. When you're there, you're aware of it. Like that's just a machine making movies. And over here, you will spend years talking about making a film. It's just the nature of it. We don't have the same money. I think they've just got to do it. I think in the end, that's the only thing. What I wanted to say, just maybe it's linked to that, is to get something made. I suppose we're here at a film festival. For me, the only reason I was able to kind of make films and continue to make films was right from shorts to features. It was getting my films to film festivals. Even if I didn't have distribution, they were seen and people would see them. And then I met a producer because I went to a short film festival in France, and a French producer said, what do you want to make next? And so he produced my first feature because nobody in London at the time wanted to kind of produce my first feature. So this film festivals, I would just say that even if you don't have distribution, getting your film out there and seen, winning an award abroad will make you much more interesting at home. And that is a really key part of the process that we haven't talked about, particularly if you've made one or made a low-budget one or your second one. Don't ignore that part of it. Of making the film is really important, most importantly, and get it seen by someone somewhere around the world. Because you don't really know where your audience is when you start making your films until the films get out there.
Mike?
Just want to say one other thing. And that is to say, I think everyone here should buy Michael's book. It's really good.
Thank you, Mike.
We've really made the most of our time. We've overrun by 15 minutes. Sorry to the festival, but it felt like we needed to do that. Thanks, everyone, for coming and for your questions, and particularly huge thanks to Leigh, Michael Winterbottom, Asif Kapadia. Thank you.